Hi guys. So this I've tried to film this a lot and it's just not happened for various reasons, camera things and all sorts. So this is going to be a video series focusing on those who have had family problems, separation from family, particularly in the form of adoption and fostering, but also in other ways. And that's only because I'm coming at it from the perspective of being an adopted child. So I may talk more about adoption, but it relates to many different, family separations. And it's also going to include witchcraft and ancestry and how we can try and connect to our ancestors or deal with the issues that come up from separating from family as witches. So some videos will be focused more on the problems that we can face, and others will focus more on, rituals or elements of the craft that can help. So I'm going to cover connecting to ancestors with ritual suggestions in part of this series, as well as suggestions on how to use astrology, lunar magic, tarot to help you work through things. There'll also be some discussions on ancestral memory, ancestral healing, and rituals or spell ideas I found helpful with some prayers that don't focus on ancestry. But there might also be some talk about myth, because in many myths actually, but certainly in Celtic myth, there is a lot of adoption and fostering actually. So yeah, there may be some discussion on myth. I know that there will be those out there who were separated from family and have found it just easier to accept than others. I also know that there'll be those out there who are just not ready to dig at those feelings. But if you are, then this video series is for you. It's also for those of you who struggle with family, who have been hurt by them and perhaps have had to cut ties themselves as an adult. It's for those of you who struggle with connection with family, so perhaps you have that connection, but it's a very difficult one. And, they're not a very nice person, but you're not able to cut the ties and you still love them. Also, just as a side note, when I use we in this video, of course, we have not felt all of these things, but many of us have, so please just put to one side anything that doesn't apply to you. I've been thinking about doing this video series for a really long time, but I haven't felt quite ready. And recently I've had a lot of signs coming up that suggest I do, including yesterday as well. Someone posted on Facebook about blood being thicker than water, which comes up in this video. But the sign that tipped me to do it was a beautiful Instagram post that Kellyanne Maddox had put up that related actually to a dream that I had where I finally began to understand something, and that kind of revelation was that it's taken me too long to realise that I am not the wind-stripped branches of my family, but part of the ever-seeking twisted roots, strong in the ground, that can nourish them and allow them to bloom. Now, when we are denied connection to our families, whether through adoption, fostering or other means, there's definitely a wound. And in adoption, Nancy Verrier has described this as the primal wound. She's also written some books, including one titled The Primal Wound, about it. And if anyone's interested, it is a very good read, but can be quite difficult. So yeah, go easy on yourself if you want to read that and you haven't yet. There are other wounds too, those created from emotional disconnection, from neglect, abuse, both physical and emotional. Those with a parent who walked out their life, those from growing up in a family who were cruel to others. There are wounds that stem from being disconnected from a family early on because of hospital care or parents' illness. Babies who needed to be in incubators can actually experience very similar fears and feelings to those who have been adopted as they grow up. So one thing that I connected with in my own working through research and theory surrounding adoption is the fact that many of us with these wounds are not given time to grieve. We're not able to experience and work through our loss often because society does not recognize it as the huge and painful loss that it is. My own experience was that as a child, I thought about my birth parents a lot. I was intensely aware of that part missing. I remember standing at my window time and time again as a child crying because I missed them, but because I couldn't show this really in public. Not to the extent that a child who was grieving for a dead parent would. I was also lucky enough to be very bonded with my adopted parents, but I had some very difficult experiences in early childhood, and some that I perceived to be dangerous as well because of my initial experiences, which kind of made those issues more inset because it felt like they were confirming things. Now, these built up within me, and when I reached my teenage years, I had a lot of issues. But I really felt that I had to find my birth family, and I wasn't able to find them at that point because in the UK, the law is that you need to be 18 to search. And same, if your child is not 18 as the birth parent, you cannot search either. So despite that, I was asking to search them. I was even phoning agencies pretending to be older than I was at the time. And I was told constantly by people that I should be happy to have my adopted parents and that I was really lucky and didn't realise how lucky I was. And I actually heard that throughout my life, but at that point it was a very unhelpful thing to hear. And it can be really damaging to hear that constantly. So the problem was I did and do know, and I'm so truly grateful for how lucky I am in many areas, but that doesn't stop the fact that I have lost some of those who are important to me. And, you would never turn to someone who has just lost their dad to cancer and say, oh, well, at least you've got your stepdad now, that should be enough. Or turn to a pregnant lady who's just burying her 3-year-old and say, one on the way, though, that'll replace this one. You wouldn't say it. It's not okay to say. And that is accepted within society that it isn't okay to say those things. And if you do say and think those things, you really need to have a rethink. But, it can be very hard for people who haven't had issues within their family like that or family separation to understand the wound that it causes because they just haven't experienced it and can't imagine that feeling of disconnect very often. They grew up looking into the eyes of those around them and feeling connection. They grew up with the stability of recognizing their hair came from their father and their fiery temper came from their grandmother. They grew up with roots, while many of us felt rootless. Even as if a breeze could just blow us from our ground. They grew up with parents who made choices for them that they perceived and understood to be safe. Whereas many of us grew up knowing our parents have made choices that hurt us. The initial choice in our life perhaps may have been something that hurt us. And also choices that they made that made us feel very unsafe. We then sat and we listened to stories as we grew up into young children about how mums always come back and are there to comfort you all of the time. And friends, families, would say things like blood is thicker than water with this careless knowledge that we couldn't understand. And people say it much more often than they realise. Your friend's dad breaks down in his car, the uncle comes to help, and out comes blood is thicker than water. It's there. And then we ended up feeling like these wind-stripped branches, leaves constantly torn off and battered about on the lookout for the next storm and unable to relax. Blood had not been thicker than water for us, and our mums had not come back and comforted us. They had not given us stability. And if these things were not true for us, and yet were true for most families, many of us felt, inside us that surely we must be the problem. And if I hear these things now, these statements of blood is thicker than water and so on, I often challenge them because it's just not true. And I'm not saying that you have to at all. You know, you just try and talk to yourself and remember that it wasn't you. It was not you. No matter what you've been told, what others think, it was not you. And I know, I really know how hard it is to truly feel it instead of just saying it. But keep trying as much as you can, and I will come back to this more in another video. But to say how, you know, the ways of the craft can help with it and with those feelings. And so we grew up hearing all these stories and having this understanding. And when we came to witchcraft, which many of us watching this will have, we found many practices surrounding the blood ancestors. And again, you know, we felt this empty space, and even in the craft, where we felt deeply called to go, our loss was being made obvious. You know, we couldn't connect to our blood ancestors, or we didn't want to, because of what they had done or who they were, whether it was to us or to others. You know, it deeply affected us. And we felt ourselves again disconnected and rootless. Perhaps we didn't know the names of our ancestors. You know, perhaps we did not want to reach out to ancestors related to those people who had hurt us so deeply that life became a battle. Perhaps we did not want to connect to people who shared blood with those who refused to connect to us, who made us feel small and unloved, who told us we weren't worthy, whether through action or through speech, you know, who threatened us or were violent to us. There are so many reasons why we might feel traditional ancestor practice is not doable. It was only very recently that I truly began to start to realise that I could be these nourishing roots of my family and of myself. You know, I began to truly take it into my heart and not just my mind. There's a big difference between knowing the theory of something and being able to say it and actually deeply feeling it. And I realised that, you know, if I went back to the beginnings of humanity, and we can look at both the evolutionary theories, but also the Gaia hypothesis even, you know, I am connected to everyone, and somewhere within me is this history of an old sea creature. Somewhere within me is the historical connections to my adoptive family, to my friends, to the stars, the trees and animals. Now, I'll come to connecting with adoptive ancestors in another video, because I do feel it's different, and I do feel that for some it can be more difficult because it just is, you know, there's a lot going on there. But I also realised during that love is thicker than everything. You know, if you have a friend who is close to you, a partner, your connection not being recent blood does not change how far you will go for them. Your love for them does. So that is a response to this idea that blood is thicker than water. You know, if you want to reply, tell them love is thicker than blood. So much thicker than blood. You know, blood has not saved many children from abuse. Blood has not, you know, saved people from being killed by their spouses or beaten. It's not blood that makes us faithful to a partner. And it's not blood that makes us drop everything to help our best friend. Blood is not the only binder in witchcraft, nor the only cord. Love is also such a strong bond. And something I've always deeply admired about Kellyanne is her ability to open up new avenues of thought. And I remember a video and an interview that she gave a good while ago now about her using her favourite artists and people who had inspired her on her altar, and I believe that Frida Kahlo and David Bowie came up. Now, in Kellyanne's post, she said, "Start your own tradition, be your own ancestor, carve the path anew, be the beginning of something wild and honest and vehement, give yourself your blessing, Call upon the past versions of yourself. Call upon the future versions of yourself. Call upon the rebels and rock stars and artists and icons who gave you hope and boldness. You are a creator. Create without shame. And I just believe that is so true. You know, creating and carving out tradition is something that I'm in the process of doing at the moment and have been for a while. I do call upon certain human ancestors. However, I also call upon the sea as my mother, a great mother who bore the very beginnings of me, a primal and wild mother who both creates and destroys, and who never fails to bring me calm when I go to her. You know, is there a parent in nature who you can open to, who brings comfort and is there to teach and guide you? And some people will know this instantly. Some may already be working in this way. But if you're not working in this way yet, then have a think. You know, it may be that something in nature has a more sibling feel to it or a grandparent feel, but it's something there that we can access and that can be such a healing relationship. Another thing that I do is to work on my shadow aspects. But now I also try to look at experiences that I've had or situations I've put myself in and recognize my strengths as well as my weaknesses. You know, I call upon those strengths within me. And I sometimes go back and literally call upon not exactly my past self, but the elements of strength and, you know, any positive element that I experienced back then. I also create spiritual practices that not only bring progress, but joy and wholeness. I try to remind myself that it's fine to hold my own lantern and guide myself. And I remember that there are others out there holding lanterns for me, and blood just doesn't have to be the reason for that. And Kellyanne had a beautiful part about holding lantern in her Instagram post. So, you know, let's begin to look at those people who left their mark on our lives in a positive way. Let's look at those who we have admired, whether we met them or not, and let's reach out to them. I think it is useful to keep it small at the beginning. There can be a tendency to want to push the boat out, but actually keeping it small can be very effective and mean that you don't fizzle out or become just overwhelmed, you know. So, you know, an offering and a moment dedicated to them, bringing them into your thoughts and thinking of the lessons and gifts that they gave you can be enough to begin. One of the things that I do is to leave a cup of tea in the morning. However, as I've mentioned before, I also sing a song to my ancestors as I sweep in the morning. I sing to my spirits as well when I sweep in the morning. There's obviously like a mishmash there. And those are two small things. But if you find a rock star left their mark on your life and taught you lessons, you could sing one of their songs. If you were inspired by a friend's grandmother who taught you to cook, then blow a sprinkle of her favourite herbs into the wind before you leave for work. If you had a cricket teacher that influenced you, anoint a cricket ball to leave on your altar and each morning sit with it. And just say a few words to him or say nothing and just focus on the feeling he gave you and focus on him. It can be these little things that begin a really fulfilling journey. Now, I actually pulled a card for this video, and I got the 10 of Cups. It's the Raven's Prophecy Tarot. Now, at first, some might find it a bit strange that the card that denotes familial or domestic bliss in many readings has come up. But what this card is really telling us, I think, is that we can create that bliss. You know, following on from what Kellyanne said, we really can work at creating that environment and those feelings for ourselves. We can find, as Rachel Pullett puts it, that life can bring happiness and not just an absence of pain. And I think that's a really important point. You know, this card is about recognizing the good things. And believe me, I really know that that's not always easy. My adoption trauma caused a form of PTSD in me, and I also have bipolar alongside that. So I don't say this with carelessness or lack of understanding. You know, I know there are days where you're so numb that even when you try to find something good, you don't feel that it's good. And pushing through those days is the hardest thing. And yeah, I do think that we can hugely overlook the good qualities within ourselves, but we can also view situations as wholly negative when, even though that wound was caused, we can recognize some of the things that came from it were positive. Now, these don't overwrite the negatives, not at all. They don't make them better. They're not a remedy for the negatives, and they don't outweigh them in my eyes. But they can bring some balance, and some balance to the way we think about things, and perhaps structure our thought patterns to search for the lessons, to search for the positive things that have come. And the Ten of Cups can really be about balance, about things working together to create happiness. It can guide us to recognize that perhaps we need to look at where we are struggling and bring that to balance. You know, do we need to work on our fear of loss or our hypervigilance? Are we abusing ourselves through purposely denying ourselves sleep, or trying to quiet the child inside us through food or drugs or drink? Are we hurting ourselves in some way? Have we given ourselves the actual allowance to grieve the loss of a family, the loss of a childhood, the loss of an emotional connection that we needed at that time? You know, have we actually given ourselves the space and permission to accept that we do feel sad? Are we blocking out our feelings or finding ourselves shut away so we don't risk that pain of connection? Are we lying to ourselves about something we say we're doing for fun or even for spiritual progress when it actually taps into comforting but deeply destructive thought patterns? You know, I have seen people who use flying ointments, and although I'm not against flying ointments, you know, I use flying ointments, but sometimes you can see that the reason they're using it is only partially spiritual, and really it is tapping into some of those destructive, painful thought patterns. And fasting is another thing I often see, which, yes, it does have a lot of spiritual benefit, but unfortunately it can really be unsafe for some people. And you know, there are other ways to find these spiritual benefits and connections that I think, if we are being honest with ourselves and we are tapping into these destructive thought patterns, then perhaps we need to look for other ways of doing it that aren't so destructive. Because we do have it in ourselves to reach back and to start to bring these things into balance. We have the strength within us to create a future ahead that is truly joyful. And if we look at this card, we are surrounded by those who love us. You know, whether they are ancestors of the past, those of the present, or those yet to come. And we also have the power to reach out and create these loving connections with people and with living people. Even if we feel rooted to the spot with fear now, we can do it. And we can journey to the place where we can do it. We can build practices that honor people who came before us. We can discover ourselves in the world around us, discover our ancestry in nature. You know, we can read the words of a book and realize that we are not alone, that somebody else is expressing something that we have thought and yet never said. You know, you can read your deepest feelings in a book and think, my God, you know, somebody else feels that too. We can hear lyrics in a song that make our hearts move with this realization that we're not alone. We are so loved, and we can love ourselves even if it means to do it means pulling the bandage off the wound. You know, let's be the roots and not the wind-stripped branches, for we are strong and we are so not rootless. And if you've enjoyed this video, then please do join with me on this series. It will really be a journey for me as well, but I hope that sharing some of the things that have helped me can just really help others and make them realise that they are not alone. So yeah, much love and blessings to all of you. Bye guys.